Welcome. Today I'm going to talk about the first technique of influence that you'll be subjected to in male-female relationships. Most of these techniques are universal, and therefore they are both in sex. I will tell you how it works, what its mechanism is, and how to defend against it. Come on, women will try to manipulate. Is that what you want or not? The only question is, will you allow it? It's an evolutionary mechanism to compensate for male physical advantage. It's done by every woman, grandmother, mother, wife, and lover. Besides, the same thing is happening in the other direction. You too are trying to influence women in a relationship context. That's the game. This has always been the case and will be the case in the foreseeable future. It's normal to influence people. It can't be avoided. The problem arises when influence turns into manipulation. The difference is that, in the case of manipulation, the real intentions are not revealed and communicated. Because if they were, you obviously agree to carry out someone else's plans, incompatible with your interests and, most importantly, at your expense. To be plain, you'd realize too soon that you're used and that you meet other people's needs mostly for free. According to the definition, manipulation is a form of influencing a person or group in such a way that the object of manipulation unconsciously and voluntarily achieves the goal of the manipulator. Every woman will at some point want to use you for her goals, and to minimize the risk of your lack of cooperation, will use techniques of manipulation. There is a need for truly conscious and strong people to speak straight about their needs, because the strong is not afraid of rejection, so afford him to be honest. If there is desire and fear of loss, there will be ego too. And then there will be manipulation. Naturally, few women would admit it, because in this way they would be at risk of being exposed to their actions. Therefore it falls mythical, I am different, but do not have the illusions that it is different and you hit the unicorn. It's just a matter of time and your knowledge to be able to notice it, because you will surely experience it on your own. The difference between a so-called normal girl and a toxic girl is the amount and frequency of manipulation that she will use. The toxic will use these techniques roundabout, without rest, without empathy, without scruples. You don't count for them. You only count for a goal that you won't be aware of. I'm sorry, but that's the rules of the game. The first and most common technique of manipulation has very many variations, but basically it is reduced to arousing guilt in you. Most often without the basics, because you have actually done nothing wrong. But once you accept this alleged guilt on yourself and believe that you have done wrong, you will have conscientious grievances because of it. They are the ones that will force you to change your behavior to what a woman wants, or at least cause a mess in your head. Technically, the mechanism is as follows. If you accept the conviction that you are guilty of something, it will automatically start to mean that you have done something wrong. You have committed an act that is bad or has bad, possibly rude, or socially unacceptable consequences. No normal person likes to think bad about himself, so an unpleasant cognitive dissonance is created, which you will subconsciously want to reduce. You yourself will feel the need to correct the alleged wrongdoing, and you will change your decision or your conduct yourself. If you did something wrong, you can fix it by doing it differently. By default, well, at this point the manipulator succeeds, because using your desire to repair, she has just obtained a change in your behavior. This technique is very ugly for several reasons. First, it affects your emotional state. That is, it makes you feel bad about yourself. That's how guilt works if you accept it. For this reason, it is a toxic method. Secondly, it exploits your ignorance and naivety, and simply your breathiness, that is, your goodness. As a good person, you do not want anyone to suffer because of you, and already in particular a person close to you. I'm not talking about accidents, but about conscious action. Thirdly, it operates below the threshold of the conscious mind's attention, because by influencing your emotional state, your conscious brain will have a tendency to seek rationalization of that feeling. You'll be looking for a rational reason why what you feel can be true. If you don't know how to manipulate them, you won't even take them into account. The brain will be looking for a context in which the manipulator's words will make sense, and when it finds it, even if it's just an imagination, it will be able to believe in it without any obstacles. Then, the incubated guilt becomes yours. In addition, this technique is often repeated many times, which means you will not get a suggestion once. It will be repeated to effect. As a man, you will eventually begin to be annoyed by such repetitions of constant accusations against you, and you may tend to forgive for holy peace. It's a mistake, because every time you let go, you become more prone to let go in the future as well. For the sake of holy peace, you will forgive once, then the second, third, and before you realize it, you will forever. There are many verbal examples of what a woman will say to provoke you to feel guilty. Here are just a few of them. How could you do that? This is an example of the hidden assumption that what you did was unacceptable. The sentence itself is formally a question. The meaning gives it a tone full of mistrust or contempt. How could you? Sometimes a command will be added directly and this sentence will sound, how could you do that? I felt bad. Shame on you. I've been so good to you and you're rewarding me like that. This is an example of a combination. One sentence, and in addition, the reciprocity rule is involved. One time I had the following situation which made me understand exactly how the mechanism of inciting guilt works. The girl had her birthday. Unfortunately, bad luck wanted me to let a member of my family go to the hospital. I spent a few hours in the hospital. As a result, I was late for those few hours. I informed you that this is the case and I am sure I will be late. The girl showed up at the hospital about 30 minutes after I heard to see if I've darkened. Acts, not words. Remember, gentlemen, ladies are checking on topics that matter to them. They don't believe a word. After inspecting my authenticity, she went to a party. When I finally got to the venue, all the guests were already out. That's when it started. It's the hour of mourning. How horrible I am. How bad she felt about me. None of my rational translations were accepted by her. Even the fact that she was in the hospital and she saw with her own eyes that it was an accident. No, it didn't matter. That wasn't the goal. I was supposed to feel guilty about the situation, to make it easier to control me. Luck wanted me to see her smiling and happy 5 minutes earlier when they were still friends. And the mood changed only when we were left alone. I thought something was wrong. I had an important and justified reason for my absence. And the girl, instead of rejoicing that I finally arrived, let through a thick emotional attack. Something was wrong. With every sentence, I saw increasing pressure to take the blame on myself. And I have to admit, she was an excellent manipulator. Every word in the sentence was thought out and aimed at provoking as much guilt as possible. Respect for your ability to influence emotions. Unfortunately, I didn't accept that induced guilt. Of course, culturally, I apologized for the situation, but I had nothing to blame myself for. After about 10 minutes of verbalizing me, when you saw that it didn't do anything for her, she decided to go for a thicker act. Tears. He started crying. Shit, hysteria. Another dozen minutes of telling me my alleged bad behavior was reinforced by crying. At one point, I asked why she didn't cry when I wasn't there. Then she was happy with her friends like a child, and now she's crying. Why? I apologized to her, and what else does she expect from me? Then I noticed that she was trying to flatter because she couldn't tell me explicitly that she wanted me to listen to her and be obedient, like a beaten dog. At some point, I started having a really good time because I saw and felt an increasing powerlessness in manipulating it. I said, listen, I apologized even though I didn't do anything wrong. If you want, I can apologize to you a second, third, fifth, and seventh time. But I don't know what you expect from me, because I couldn't do anything else in this situation. In her eyes, although weeping, I saw no sadness and grief, but an incredible fury. She tried her best, but she didn't get out. And that was the reason for her incredible bitterness, because I broke off her manipulative rope. Not that I wasn't at the party, where she was having a great time in my absence. She wasn't desperate then, so what changed in those 5 minutes? By the way, when this lady tried hard to convince me of my guilt because the whole thing lasted about an hour, I watched her closely. Her body language, the way she constructed sentences, the choice of words, the intonation, the color of her voice, and then my emotions that came after those sentences. And I was 100% sure that I was dealing with an attempt to manipulate. It was an interesting, hourly assertiveness training. When you failed to get me to the corner under the title of guilt, you changed your tactics. And an hour later, when I brought her home, there was no trace of ill health, no crocodile tears, and there was a love bombardment. Stick and carrot method. What a classic game. After I showed that guilt doesn't work on me, it's never been so intense again. The second story with another lady, and despite the different circumstances, it shows the same pattern. We're lying in bed, you're checking my boundaries by getting annoyed with me. Let's say he's kind to me, which was pleasant, but after a few minutes it started to irritate me, so I repented with the same thing. Then the lady jumped out of the bed like burned, saying that as I could, so it can't, and so it must not. And that what I do at all. I smiled calmly and replied with regret that I had done exactly what she had done a moment ago. So if she thinks it was wrong, she's a lot worse than me. I knew the scheme very well then, so I didn't want to discuss it with her. I just kicked the ball and tightened the screw, because I knew exactly what her reaction would be and what would happen next. So when I kicked the ball and I said it was a lot worse than me, you fell into a delicate hysteria. How dare I? She put off her classic tear hole, and then she didn't want to go back to bed. She sat at the door of the room, quietly whispering. She was doing it quietly, but loud enough for me to hear that she was injured in a cushion. That's when I decided to tighten your screw. I got out of bed, walked up to her, sat next to her, and said, I understood she wanted to cry. And I don't have a problem with it. I just point out that it's cold on the floor and it can get sick. It will be more comfortable and pleasant to cry in bed, but the choice, of course, belongs to her, and I respect her decision. And then I went back to bed without waiting for her reaction. I took a comfortable sleeping position and fell asleep. She thought she was bluffing, but when she saw that I was asleep and I had her toys somewhere, she strangely refused to cry, and 20 minutes later, she was already in bed, pushing her ass on me. I know it's been 20 minutes, because the slug woke me up, of course, by accident. And of course, she just started doing the same thing before all these games. But I didn't want to have sex anymore. So I turned to the other side and, in a feminine style, I said, no thanks, I lost my desire. Guess what happened this morning? She finished what she started last night with no games and no problems. In this particular situation, you tried to provoke me to feel guilty while you were doing the same thing that you accused me of. And she tried to play with pleasure on the principle of push and pull, to set the framework of our acquaintance at the beginning and get it that it is she who controls the relationship. Unfortunately, it failed. I couldn't express my guilt and I didn't want the bedroom, so she had to change tactics. It's a repetitive scheme, which is why you need to know. When you're not needy and desperate, you get what women can give you. They want to give it to you, they want to impose it on you. By passing their tests, you show a strong framework, and biology additionally enhances their desire for you as a strong guy. Of course, you will deny it, but that is not true. If they are not interested in a guy, then they do not notice him at all and do not waste time testing. These are the rules of the game. Guilt is used to make you do something exactly the way the manipulator wants it. This is a universal technique. All the manipulators have it designed to perfection. They arouse them with their words, their pronounced eyes, their theatrical crying, their gestures. There are 1,000 ways. You need to know what emotions you're feeling. This requires some training because it is necessary to know yourself in this respect. When you do that, you'll see the difference between the different emotions. You will feel their intensity, and you will notice when someone else's words provoke different reactions, feelings, and emotions in you. Without this knowledge, you will simply feel and react at the primary level. Manipulators don't want you to be aware of your emotions, because then they won't be able to play them and exploit them. Once you have trained the ability to recognize your emotions, only then will you be able to begin to control them. Until you see them, they rule you, and someone who knows can control them. And that's over you. The second method is to refrain from accepting other people's suggestions. You have your head, and you know if you've done something wrong or not. There's little attention here. Whether you feel you've done something wrong depends on your set of values and beliefs. For example, if you think you need to buy a flower for Women's Day, every time you don't, you'll feel uncomfortable. That's what it's like to feel guilty. Your behavior will conflict with your beliefs. Now I'll add that they help manipulate people to their goals at your expense. Manipulating people use existing social norms and interpret your behavior as contrary to those norms. That's how they create a sense of guilt. When you accept their interpretation, they already have you. You will feel unpleasant discomfort. As a result, you will want to get rid of that feeling and feel better. And to do that, you're going to behave the way the manipulator wants you to. Chess and mat. In a very bad case for you, the manipulator will take the time to instill different beliefs in you, which she will then use against you. It's a kind of brainwashing, or whoever prefers, classical conditioning. That's what people do when they're broken to the bone marrow. Be aware that they're there. And if you don't know how to recognize them, they might want to take advantage of you, and they won't make it easy for you to get to know them, because it's not in their interests. You can't accept someone's suggestion, but to do that, you need to have your own strong point of view. Once you have it, it'll be harder for you to be influenced, because you already have some belief. This is the protective mechanism of our psyche. When you just know what you did and what you didn't, it'll be harder to impose a foreign point of view on you. It is also very important to have a strong sense of self-worth, because when you have them, you'll recognize very quickly that someone is trying to lower them for you, which is the manipulation method I'm going to go over to. The point is that if you have a fact-based belief in your values, you will have a belief that your actions are right. Of course, I assume that these actions are indeed right, and you know their real motives. Otherwise, you can be fooled, and telling yourself he's doing well, despite, for example, hurting others. This is rationalization, which I have mentioned many times. Note that the narcissist and other sociopaths and psychopaths have such a very strong belief in their value and consequently in their infallibility that they will never pass through their mouths a sincere word of apologies. They can say it as a smoke veil if tactically it gives them any benefit. But they don't feel it. They don't feel sorry or guilty. And that's the way to recognize them. Because if you learn the mechanism of causing guilt in yourself, you will be able to apply it to others. According to the rule, to be an anti-terrorist, you must first know the enemy's techniques. A separate question is whether you want to use it for defense or attack. But most often, empathic people do not need to manipulate others. So don't use this tool, but you need to know how it works to protect yourself when it's needed. I'm talking about this because if you apply the guilt-based manipulation technique to someone you suspect is manipulating you in this way, they will recognize what you're doing in a second. You'll have the first clue that you're dealing with a manipulator. The person who is aware of these mechanisms will most often draw your attention to what you are doing and say, or ask you to stop, or simply leave because he knows these games. The manipulator will never say that, because it will mean that she knows the technique and therefore knows what you're doing or what you are trying to do. She knows because she used that phrase 1,000 times. But she won't want to show that she knows, because then she would have to reveal herself as a potentially manipulative person. The third way is the easiest but with the highest costs. Just close yourself to other people, become a cold, cynical, egocentric bitch, and start behaving like a proverbial asshole. Women go on assholes because they represent traits that the female goddamn brain considers to be strong, so they later rationalize their behavior. You won't have to worry about that. This is biology. In the US, 20 years ago, Tom Likas conducted his radio program on FM waves. His very simple advice to the listeners sounded like an asshole. Treat women in advance as children or as something unnecessary. He didn't explain in detail why it works, except that women react well to guys who behave like that. They do not betray them, they do not leave for a very long time, and so on. Thousands of men have been calling him during the live broadcast for years and thanking him for what he's doing. Some even called him the father they didn't have. This approach, of course, works. Today I even know why, but it also has one fundamental disadvantage. If you start acting like an asshole, there's a risk that you'll start doing it all the time. Because it's easier and it costs less energy. And man has it to himself that he usually doesn't like to get tired. Then, over time, behaving like that will become a habit. By becoming a habit, it will change your beliefs, and this can make it difficult for you to stop doing it even in situations that do not require it. This, in turn, may lead to you becoming effective with women, but becoming emotionally empty. Fewer and fewer things will make you happy, to the extent that you're going to need more and more experience to feel anything. If you don't take care of it in time, it can get you into a lot of addiction, with different manners and including... I've tested this pathway and I know it works in terms of efficiency. But there is nothing for free. It has its costs. You can check it out. I'm just warning you where the traps are. The choice, as usual, is yours, because the consequences of your actions are yours. Using this method, you can go to the dark side of power. The basic thing to defend yourself against this technique is not to accept guilt. If you didn't do anything wrong, don't apologize. If you've done something wrong, apologize and don't explain. That's what the manipulator is waiting for. Anything you say in translation will be used against you. The very fact of translation is read as a weakness. A woman who is not toxic will also say things that suggest your alleged guilt, to benefit yourself. She'll just do it less or much less intensely. Gentlemen, they're just like that. This is also due to a slightly different way of thinking. Men think linearly on the principle that event A causes event B. Women think meaningfully, so event A means event B. That's why there are so many misunderstandings in relationships, because of different perceptions of the same reality. For example, you come home after work, you're tired, and you make yourself sleepy. It's normal for a guy, isn't it? When you get up, you hear from a woman who wants to watch a movie with you, and you prefer to lie down. Everything is more important to you than to me. So we have the event A. The day at work was exhausting. We have consequences. B. Fatigue causes drowsiness, need for regeneration, and sleepiness. The woman, on the other hand, usually thinks this way. B. Dreaming. Sleeping means C. That you don't love her anymore. Because if you loved, you'd sleep. The original reason is not taken into account at all in its reasoning. I mean, a tired day. On the other hand, from a male point of view, sentence C is not taken into account. I mean, what it means to a woman. The last thing you need to know to recognize whether someone is trying to manipulate you or just passing on information is the emotional load of a sentence. You'll need to know the emotional layer of language. The same information can be transmitted in several different ways. It is difficult to smuggle verbal manipulation if you operate with sentences at the level of facts. For example, you've made an appointment for a specific time, and let's assume you're late. The phrase that describes such an event on a factual level is, "You're 30 minutes late." Is it emotionally characterized? No. These are dry facts, but just add one word and the context of the sentence changes. You're 30 minutes late. Add an intonation and you get a completely different emotional phrase that says 30 minutes is an eternity. 30 minutes. Other emotions are different perceptions of reality, and this means different reactions and different behaviors. The last factor that affects the effectiveness of this technique, which makes it so ugly, is emotional involvement. The closer to you the person serves such guilt, the worse you will feel about it. For example, if you meet a small drunkard somewhere on the street who has a bad day and blames you for his failures, you won't even notice it, because you don't pay attention to him and he is not important to you, so you do not count on his opinion. But if you get the same illusion from a partner you trust and idealize, then you have a much less natural tendency to critically analyze the words of such a person. Once you let her into your world, it means she's been through some sort of verification and you don't have to repeat it. Unfortunately, in the case of ladies, this is not always true. You need to know that on average, women can pretend much longer than the average man will test them. Among other things, this is the stage of enchantment and bombardment with love, to allow a de facto stranger to enter your world on a very intimate, emotional level. Therefore, at the initial stage of acquaintance, manipulative people will do everything to make you feel special in their company. Then you will be more prepared to continue to penetrate deeper and deeper. You may even have the impression that you understand each other without words. Don't believe that. Always test. This impression can be created artificially. They can do that. There's nothing for free. The other unpleasant side of the coin comes only when you leave the guard and let someone get very close to you. This will make you more vulnerable to these manipulative attacks. Guilt is an unpleasant feeling, sometimes very much. Some toxic people enjoy causing emotional suffering to others. They draw strength from it, and in some evil way it drives them. I'd even say they're excited to hurt others. In this way, they feel more important, better, and stronger. Therefore, sometimes the technique of Greystone is recommended for hopeless cases. You're not responding. You're not paying attention to them. You don't allow yourself to be fed by your emotions and your suffering. In the most severe cases, you have to overwhelm everything they do and say. It's hard because they'll do everything they can to make you feel and show your emotions. Of course, the manipulative girls will fake that all I'm saying is meaningless, that it's nonsense, and she's different, and that someone hurt you, that you think so and now you can't love, and that they're very sorry for you. Just remember that false people have an interest in making you see them as kind friends, so don't worry about such opinions. The only thing you're going to know is it's going to be harder to catch up with you. That's the point. Honest people have no problem with that because they don't want to pick you up. They won't embarrass you because of this, which is why you need to know about different games. Finally, I'll tell you a secret. Women who get manipulated are probably worse off than gentlemen. Those who have experienced the feelings of this manipulation on themselves know how destructive the effects it has had on their psyche. Now think about it. Women think a lot more. They're analyzing everything, every word, and they're looking for meaning there. That's how they're constructed. This mechanism makes it much harder for them to defend themselves against this manipulation. A guy will think of such a sentence of guilt 10 times, woman 70. The work of the female brain and the abundance of thought makes them even easier to use. That's why I feel that I don't want to take revenge on the women in general for hitting some crazy girl and hurting you. Non-toxic women are a relatively easy target. They want to feel loved, too. So they let toxic guys get very close, and they use it later. They also believe in love. And the fact that they are more effective and the emotional swings that manipulators can serve, they confuse with love, causes them to fall. Just like the guys who don't know the rules of the game. I'm not insisting, but if you really want to get revenge, find some toxic woman and play with her. There's only going to be a ride without a grip. Emotional roller coaster guaranteed. Just be careful, because you're walking on really thin ice. But if you survive, you'll learn things about yourself that no book can give you. However, it is best to avoid toxic people, because they really have for a normal person the bestial talent to simply unintelligible spying on the human psyche.